I'm gonna tell you about the most stunning opening sequence that has ever been created for an animated movie. And it's not Up. But first, a little context. The Rescuers is a 1977 movie released by Disney starring two little mice who help kids who are in trouble. It was considered a success upon its premiere, and to this day it has a place in many people's hearts and home video collections. 13 years later, the company decided to release a sequel to this classic, titled The Rescuers Down Under. It follows a similar formula to the original, with our heroes attempting to rescue a child that has been kidnapped by a greedy villain, but this time in Australia. And the animators looked at this premise and said, "We're gonna create an opening sequence that is so good, nothing else is ever gonna live up to it." Including the rest of the movie. And little did they know, this film was destined to make history. Just not in the way that they expected. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a look at this fateful motion picture as I want to talk about The Rescuers Down Under. One of the things that made the original Rescuers movie stand out was its ability to juxtapose its cutesy elements with its terrifying ones, never sliding too far off to either end of the spectrum. You've got a film that is filled with adorable creatures having to deal with despicable villains, with its frightening sequences always subverted by equally heartwarming ones. It created a balance that made the story feel very grounded, despite its more cartoonish elements. In The Rescuers Down Under, a similar effect is created by playing with a sense of scale. The outback is made of environments that are just as stunning as they are desolate, with landscapes so massive that they can barely fit on a movie screen, and they are being traveled by creatures that just can't help but feel insignificant when faced with such immensity. And when the movie starts, you are introduced to this universe in the most frenetic way possible. We begin by zooming in on a patch of grass, observing the insects that populated. The camera stands so close to them that they feel almost like giants, taking up over half of the frame. When the last bug takes flight, the music immediately swells up, and we are rushing over a field of flowers as the movie title pops on screen. We race through the grass, the huge morning sky looming above us, rocks and trees passing us by in our frantic dash. As the horizon clears up, we see one less mountain to our left, and a dot on the center of our vision. We can barely understand its outline at first, but as we continue to approach it, we see that it is a house, almost lost amidst the vastness that surrounds it. The soundtrack reaches its peak just as we fly in through the window, where we are greeted with the peaceful bedroom of our protagonist. The movie plays with this idea of size literally from the first second. As the camera shifts through the grass, we are presented with the reality of what is delicate and minuscule, only to be suddenly overtaken by openness that is so magnificent it feels almost oppressive. These are two different universes, and they are deeply intertwined. The outback is the perfect union of the big and the small. Even when we are out in the open, we never fly too far off the ground. We keep close to the flowers, just like an insect would. We pass by the giant rocky formations as if they were nothing, because what is of true importance to us exists beyond them, and it hides within the most insignificant of buildings. We then meet Cody, who is awakened by a call coming from the distance, and he sneaks out of the house in order to answer it. He runs through the desert until he arrives at a forest, where several critters flock to him. The echo he follows is a distress signal from a local animal, telling him of a captured beast. The protagonist of our Rescuers movie is a rescuer himself, in a way. Answering this call is apparently a regular occurrence for him. He follows the directions to the top of a ridge, scaling over the massive walls that surround him. What awaits him is a creature as stunning as the landscape itself, the giant eagle known as Marahute. Standing next to her, Cody looks small enough to be her offspring. She struggles to free herself, trying to snap out of the ropes that tie her down while the boy cuts them off, and in her impatience, she pushes him off the ledge. Her glorious ascension is contrasted by Cody's helpless fall, the music building up as he rushes into his doom, until the beast dives down and catches him. And so, it begins. We see the pair gradually gaining height, soaring over the walls of rock that entrap them, bursting into the endless blue sky. They float above the clouds, boundless and united. The heights that once signified danger now bring a sense of freedom, and our heroes fully embrace it. They swoop down into the rivers, rushing as rapidly as the currents themselves, until Cody leaps off the waterfall like the birds taking flight, gliding down into the wings of his companion, each fully trusting the other. She takes the boy to her nest, pulling him closer as if he was one of her young, showing him her most prized possessions, swelling with maternal pride. As Cody asks about the father of the eggs, the eagle looks down in grief, and the kid opens up about how his own father left him. They have both known loss and hardship, but they find strength in sticking together. She brings him back to the ground, taking flight once more as Cody waves her goodbye and runs through the forest, opening his arms as he pretends to soar while your brain recovers from the recent serotonin overflow. And that's 10 minutes into the movie. I have never seen flight be more gracefully captured in a 2D motion picture. I must have watched this opening sequence over a dozen times and I still get goosebumps. The idea that this giant animal needs to be rescued by a little kid that's a fraction of her size echoes the themes of the first rescuer's tale, with how only the tiniest of creatures are able to bring the help that is needed. The eagle is big up close, but she becomes almost insignificant when placed against the environment she belongs to. No one is so powerful that they are above aid, and no one is so small that they are incapable of providing it. This ride is thrilling beyond belief, the very essence of what animation can accomplish, a spectacle of movement and color, a love letter to nature and the stories that it inspires us to tell, the proof that movies can be absurdly stunning works of art. And it's barely enough to carry the rest of the film. The other 60 minutes of the movie follow Cody as he is kidnapped by a poacher who is after Marahute, and the Rescue Aid Society is warned of his case. Bernard and Bianca are considered their best agents, so they are sent out to resolve the situation. They've been working together since they rescued Penny, and their relationship has grown just as much as their fame. Bernard starts the film by planning to propose to Miss Bianca. However, every attempt he makes at popping the question is comically interrupted, because it's the 90s. And once they get to their new mission, a handsome Australian hopping mouse keeps getting in his way while trying to charm the agent, because, again, it's the 90s. The poacher, known as MacLeod, traps Cody along with the rest of the animals he has captured and tries to coax the boy into betraying the location of the eagle's nest. The kid remains silent and plots his escape with the rest of the critters, but their attempts are always stopped by the poacher's pet Joanna, which the animators had way too much fun drawing. Just as the mice are about to reach him, MacLeod tricks the boy into leading him to Marahute, and he manages to capture her. Bernard finds a way of protecting the eggs while the mother is away and rushes in to help the rest of the gang. He completes his character arc by learning to be more assertive, casually participates in murder, saves the kid while the others rescue the eagle, and they all fly off into the distance. It's a nice story and all, but it doesn't hold a candle to those first 10 minutes. My favorite review of this movie is this piece written by Roger Ebert upon the film's release. Animation can give us the glory of sights and experiences that are impossible in the real world. And one of those sights, in The Rescuers Down Under, is of a little boy clinging to the back of a soaring eagle. The flight sequence and many of the other action scenes in this new Disney animated feature create an exhilaration and freedom that are liberating. And the rest of the story is fun too. The Rescuers Down Under premiered on November 16, 1990, and it seems to have gotten some mixed reviews along the way. Nowadays, it's been mostly forgotten by the company, much like the original movie itself doesn't get all the hype it once had. Still, I feel like it's important to talk about this film, both for what it is and for what it represents. When it came out, it was treated like any other Disney motion picture, a thrilling adventure that the whole family shouldn't miss. Something we must keep in mind, though, is that Disney movies haven't always received this kind of love. Despite the classics it's been known for, the company has gone through some rough times, especially around the 80s. In the case of animated movies specifically, they weren't doing as hot as the higher-ups wanted. The film that got the company out of its rut was the 1989 release The Little Mermaid, which became a phenomenon of unforeseen proportions. What followed became known as the Disney Renaissance, as the studio kept releasing hit after hit. And in the middle of that whole process lies The Rescuers Down Under. Despite coming right after one of the studio's greatest successes, it didn't get nearly as much praise as the rest, and it underperformed at the box office. Looking at the story itself, I think there are a few reasons for this outcome. As a rescuer's plot, it follows the beats of the original movie very closely. A little kid is captured by a villain who wants to use them for their own selfish needs, searching for something that will bring them great wealth. The mice are called to help, and most of the movie is occupied by their attempts to reach the child, only really meeting them in the final act. The happy ending is kind of a given, but it's welcome nonetheless. It's not a bad story, but it's also a story that had been done in the 70s, and I would argue that the first movie kinda did it better. In the original film, Bernard and Bianca have a chance of seeing just how terrible Madame Medusa can be, so when they meet Penny, they know exactly what she is going through. They also have more opportunities to interact with her and help her out. In The Rescuers Down Under, Cody and the mice barely talk. The agents also never find out the true extent of MacLeod's wickedness, since they never see how many animals he has got caged up. Granted, kidnapping a kid and trapping a giant ego should be enough, but there's still something lacking. The love triangle stuff is a trope as old as time, and I don't think this case brings anything new to the table. Part of the fun about the relationship between Bernard and Miss Bianca is how naturally it developed over the course of their journey. There weren't any obstacles to it, they were just two agents learning to trust each other as they fought for the same noble goal. We don't need conflict to make it interesting. Watching two characters fall in love is already enough. Another thing we need to talk about is the, well, whiteness of the movie. During production, there was apparently a push from one of the main artists to cast an Aboriginal Australian kid as the lead, but the studio refused, choosing to go with, reportedly, a little white blonde kid. Roger Ebert, in the same review of the movie, also calls out these racially loaded elements, asking, why does the villain have to be so noticeably dark-complexioned compared to all of the other characters? Is Disney aware of the racially coded message it is sending? When I made that point to another critic, he argued that MacLeod wasn't dark-skinned. He was simply always seen in shadow. Those are shadows that are cast by insensitivity to negative racial stereotyping. I love the way this is worded, I'm just gonna give him my channel. Wait, what do you mean Ebert's dead? Despite all of these shortcomings, it would be unfair to blame the film's lack of success entirely on itself. When this movie bombed, the studio called off all of the marketing for it. If you hadn't seen it by then, they were practically begging you not to see it. It's a cruel practice, but not surprising. Disney really likes to pretend that failure never happened. Even though it was released during Thanksgiving season, which is considered a very favorable time for family features, it had to fight for the spotlight against Home Alone, a behemoth of cultural relevance. The poor mice just never stood a chance. The company is also notorious for pulling off the same scheme for other animated movies. Treasure Planet against Harry Potter, Princess and the Frog against James Cameron's Avatar. It's never a fair fight, and the result always favors the adversary. It is hard to predict the true impact a movie is going to have until after the hype around it has settled down. But it's not impossible. And sending off these animated features to attempt to win these battles is foolish to the point that it makes you wonder if it was really coincidental. Some say that Disney does it to try and prove a point. It knows their own flicks don't stand a chance, or worse, they wish they didn't, so they are trying to kill them faster. The reasons for this may vary, but the results are always the same. The Rescuers Down Under was never meant to succeed, and its planned failure was used to justify the studio's attempt to bury their own creation. Nowadays, the movie stands as proof of this tendency, but its legacy goes even beyond it. We need to acknowledge the fact that this was the company's first official animated sequel. This is a market that Disney would later thrust itself into, bringing results that maybe aren't always celebrated, but that certainly brought the company the profits they had always been after. Had the second Rescuer's Tale been released under this well-established direct-to-video empire, perhaps it would have been allowed to be remembered. But someone had to take the first leap of faith so the studio could figure out what worked. We need to talk about it because Disney won't, and I think it deserves to be talked about. Even though the movie wasn't meant to fly, it tried to. It really did. And for 10 glorious minutes, it soared higher than anyone could have dreamed of. And to me, that is enough to make me say we shouldn't forget it. Thank you for watching. Well, hello there. It was very nice of you to watch this video. If you have enjoyed the video, you can do those cool things such as clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the notification bell too. You can also follow me on Twitter and share this video with your friends. If you really like what I do, you should consider supporting me on Patreon. I have linked it down in the description and I highly recommend you check it out. Feel free to leave a comment down below, especially if it is about how much you love the Rescuers Down Under. I went the whole video without making a terrible Australian accent, so I decided to curse you with this at the very end of the outro. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye! One thing that was brought up a lot as a positive for this movie was its CGI effects, which I'm sure looked mind-blowing for 1990, but 30 years later, it's less theatrical feature and more me searching for my house on Google Earth.